Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, Jon Corcoran.
Hey, Jon Corcoran here, and it's such a pleasure to host this show every week. I get to talk with smart CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, authors from all kinds of different organizations, including YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, Netflix. Go take a look at my archives. There's so many great conversations in there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And today we're going to be talking about the subject of influence. How do you create it? How do you have it? How do you build it? And my guest is an absolute expert in this subject matter. His name is Jon Levy. He's the author of the new book, You're Invited, The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. He's also the founder of a community, a private community called Influencers, a community of over 2,000 industry leaders, including Nobel laureates, Olympians, celebrities, executives, royalty, and so much more. His previous book was called The 2 a.m. Principle, Discover the Science of Adventure. Go take a look at my archives, and you'll see an interview I did a number of years back when he came out with that book. Of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, where we help you, the B2B business owner, get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you have any questions, shoot us an email, support@Rise25Media, or check out our website at rise25media.com. All right, Jon, such a pleasure to be back with you here again. I'm so excited for this new book for you. And tell me about you've put out a book before, kind of clearly a glutton for punishment, having done it before. But what inspired you to go through the ordeal again, and why this specific topic? What lit a fire under you that said you had to write this book?
It's so funny you say this. So, I'm a behavioral scientist. I do research on influence and decision-making. And one of the things that I found completely crazy as I've been looking at research is that in 1985, the average American had 3 friends, just about, besides family. By 2004, we were down to about 2. Now, that's before social media, before all these social pressures, before the pandemic, which means that we've probably lost even more of our social ties. And what concerns this is that when you look at the greatest predictors of business success, right? You can track company stock value, employee sick days, and profitability to the level of oxytocin in people's bloodstreams, meaning how close they feel are connected. Similarly, the greatest predictor of human longevity is not eating lots of kale and doing a kombucha cleanse or something like that. It's number 2, strong social ties. And number 1 is social integration, feeling like we're part of a community. And it turns out that literally across any metric that really matters, belonging is probably the most important thing we can experience. That's true if it's for people and their social friendships, but also if you look at the companies that are really extraordinary, they're the ones that make you feel connected to them, the ones that integrate themselves on an emotional level to your lifestyle. And so as I was researching influence, I realized that our influence, our ability to create an impact on people or on the things that matter to us, really breaks down to 3 things. It's who we're connected to, because if we're not connected to somebody in some way, we can't really affect them. It's how much they trust us, because if somebody doesn't trust you, they're not going to want to do business with you. And the sense of community or belonging that you share. And so if I could become an expert on those things, or if you can become an expert on those things, your only limitation is to figure out what to do with that influence. And so I wanted to write this book because I felt that it was important for us to understand how to develop deep and meaningful relationships. And that's where influence comes from.
I love
our relationships.
I love the title, You're invited. I think that speaks to your approach. You're invited because it is, anyone can say it. And also it makes me feel good. I read that book, and I say, oh, I'm invited, right?
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that even if you've achieved a level of status or achievement in your career, that still has power with people. So talk a little bit about why you chose that title.
So an invite has this very strange behavioral structure. And it works like this. If I extend an invitation, I'm putting myself essentially in a vulnerable state. I'm saying, I would like your presence. I respect you. I appreciate you. The moment somebody accepts that invitation, they're completing what's called a vulnerability loop. They're saying, I actually really want to spend time with you. It's going from a request from me to a request from you the moment that you accept. You're saying affirmatively, I care about this. And in that moment, a relationship elevates and increases trust. There's this funny thing that people expect that trust precedes vulnerability. But if you really want to be trusted, it's actually the other way around. It's called a vulnerability loop. I put out a signal of vulnerability, like you hear me say I'm overwhelmed. If you make fun of me or ignore me, trust will be reduced. But if you acknowledge it and say, hey, John, no, I guess both of us are named John, but if you say, Levy, I've been overwhelmed all week too. I know how you feel. Now, both of us have demonstrated that we're vulnerable and we can trust each other at this higher level of vulnerability. An invitation is actually a vulnerability loop. It is an opportunity for me to express a desire of your presence. And then for you to fulfill that you're interested in engaging with me. And that's what I think is really wonderful. First of all, you don't need any money to have an invitation, right? Like it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are or how famous or whatever. It's not like you need a Bentley in order to have an invitation. An invitation is fundamentally the simplest form of desire for connection between people. And here's what's interesting. When you put out a podcast, you're actually putting out an invitation. You're saying, hey, I have something here that I think you're going to like, that I think is valuable to the world. If you listen to it, you're completing that loop. And so I wish I could say I came up with a title, but it was my publisher and I thought it's really lovely.
It's funny because we have on our roadmap to write a book called The Give Loop. And I love that term, the vulnerability loop. So maybe that'll be the title of your next book. You could use that next time.
Hey, I'll be honest. I think the next one's going to be about how hard I worked and about burnout culture. So I'm going to leave the vulnerability loop to you.
While we're on the topic of who you're connected to, this last year, we're recording this end of April 2021. This last year, people have been limited from traveling.
Oh, yeah.
Traveling is so integral. Or going out, having dinners, social gatherings, it's limited all of us, but you in particular, I know you love traveling, you love connecting with different people. How has the last year been on you? And then we'll dive into how you've managed to maintain connections and build connections through this difficult time.
Sure. So what I'm probably best known for is running the secret dining experience, right? So 12 people are invited. They're not allowed to talk about what they do or give their last name. They cook dinner together. And when they sit down to eat, they play a game to try and guess what everybody does. And they find out that it's an editor-in-chief, a Nobel laureate, an Olympic medalist, a member of royalty, stuff like that. And so before COVID hit, I was hosting 6 dinners a month across New York, LA, San Francisco, and Seattle, sometimes 7. And which meant that most of, like 1 out of every 6 meals I was eating each month were absolutely terrible because these meals are awful, right? Like 12 people have no idea how to cook, preparing terrible burritos. So, it was kind of funny, but I'm a person who needs to engage with a lot of people. I enjoy it. I get a lot of value from it. And when COVID hit, I realized that I can't risk getting anybody sick and that, I'm a central hub for people to connect around. And so you probably noticed this. Every business out there started taking their in-person events and just putting them online. And you may have also noticed that those were absolutely miserable and terrible. And so me and my team started researching at the base level, why do we actually attend an event? Now, the general theory was that we attend events to be entertained and to be enlightened, right? Either I'm getting information or I'm getting entertainment. But if that were true, then seeing a Zoom concert would be enjoyable, and it's not. So we realized that there's actually two other essential characteristics. One is human connection. I go to an event for the possibility of being around people, right? Do you follow a sports team?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Which team do you follow?
Well, they used to be called the Redskins. Now they're called the Washington football team.
Okay. So the going in person to a game is different than watching it on television, right? Mm-hmm. If it were the same, seeing it on Zoom would be great.
Yeah,
and it's not.
Right.
And that's because two things. One is being around other people, the opportunity to connect or just feeling the energy around you means something to us as humans. And the second is that when you start screaming and shouting, you have an impact on the people around you. You have influence, you matter. And if you're at the tail end of an 800-person WebEx, you don't. Like you could literally keel over and die and nobody would give a damn. And so we started reimagining what digital events would be. And we realized that the benefit of technology is that I can make you, John, feel like the center of attention. And so we started these digital salons where we'd have like 200 people on. And in the first 5 minutes, we'd welcome everybody and then send them into breakout rooms to meet each other and have a conversation. And we'd give them games to play. So we'd have 20 teams competing over like some absurd challenge. And then because of the community, the prizes that people won were ridiculous. So let's say your team won, John, this absurd game of just like figuring out, riddles or whatever it was. And you would get a year's supply of underwear sent to you by the president of Hanes. Now, realize, like, is that particularly expensive? No, it's not like, can all the people who are attending this buy their own underwear? Yeah, they all have Amazon Prime, right? Like, it's not an issue. But we're having celebrities and Nobel laureates and CEOs of major companies all competing and having a fun time. And we started doing this every week, and it was the highlight of people's weeks, and it was lasting 3 to 5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time on
That is
Zoom.
A long time on Zoom,
Yeah.
especially after a week of Zoom, right? It's not like...
Yeah.
So now we do it every other week, and it's been an absolute privilege. We've hosted, I don't know, 30 of these things probably by now, if not more. We invented all these games. But what we realized was that if we can offer people an experience to connect over that is novel, like it fundamentally stands out as different. It's interesting. Ideally right now, playful, because people are so stressed that we need these like moments that reduce our cortisol levels. We used to get it from like water breaks at the water cooler and having a conversation, but now those don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can curate interesting people, they don't have to be like super famous celebrities, right? Just interesting. They'll go far out of their way for it.
So for those who are listening, what advice do you have for them? Seek out these types of experiences, seek out these types of communities.
Number one is nobody likes to network. Networking quite literally evokes an experience that we feel dirty. Right? It feels like we're trying to meet somebody just to use them. And we don't respond well as humans to that overall. Realize that we don't feel that way about making friends. And when we look at what causes us to become friends with people, it's usually that we have a shared interest. So you like football, or maybe you have a hobby. For all I know, you could be a drone racer or something. It could be a culture. So if you have a certain heritage, maybe, or religious belief or something like that. Or if there's activities, right? So like you go do CrossFit. And those are the things that people tend to really connect over. And there's this misinterpretation like, oh, the CMO of T-Mobile would never want to participate in a marathon or something like that, or in pottery painting. And I'd say you're probably dead wrong. I would bet anybody who has experienced it all probably doesn't want to do another casino-themed fundraiser. But if you're going to curate like a traditional midsummer celebration because you're Swedish, that's going to be super fun for them. Mm. And you could probably cold email a lot of really impressive people and say, hey, I hear you're wonderful. This isn't about pitching you business. This is about people coming together to make friends. And these are the activities taking place. We'd love for you to join.
How do you, as a business, make this profitable? Because do you charge for people to attend to these things?
No, nothing. But also realize it's not expensive, right? So by traditional standards, the expensive part for me is the flights because I'm flying around constantly.
So the digital world actually is a lot cheaper.
Oh my God, it's super cheap. The key is that with the digital stuff, you have to just focus on being more novel and more playful. So what you gain is if you can say, I'm going to give you an hour or 45 minutes of absolute fun with interesting people, that's an easy yes, especially in like the evening hours, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of a happy hour, nobody wants another happy hour. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And the truth is that I don't need it to be like 95% of the people who attend have no business case for me, right? Like I'm never going to do business with an Olympian. Like I just don't, I'm not in that world. My businesses are, I'm in the marketing and company culture and sales world. So there's two things that you can do. First of all, there's no problem with inviting only potential customers. And the beauty of it is that if you want to stay top of mind, if you always have something interesting to invite them to that has interesting people at it, there's always a reason to stay top of mind. So you're going to increase sales, chances are, just having that reason to invite them, right? Now, will this appeal to everybody? No, but we don't need it to appeal to 100% of people. We just need it to appeal to enough people that you can have a consistent stream of business coming in. And more importantly, it allows you to build relationships as friends rather than just that salesperson who keeps knocking at the door. And that means your chances of closing are significantly higher. Especially if you're friendly, they're going to recommend you to people more so than if you're that salesperson who emails them every quarter.
I agree with that so much. I read a sales book a while back that talked about that rapport wasn't that important. Mm-hmm. And I always feel when I read something like that, I'm always like, the reason the author's writing this is because they are not good at rapport, Like, of course it's important. Like making a personal human connection with someone, even a friendship, is going to go a long ways.
Here's what's really interesting. None of our decisions are logical in any way, shape, or form, right? People don't use Macs because they're quote unquote better computers than Windows or something like that. They have an emotional response and then they justify it with really bad logic. And the difference between you using, let's say, SAP and you using Salesforce or using Adobe or whatever it is for your corporate systems is probably not going to be purely price point. It's going to be how people feel about it and how people feel about the sales team. And do they feel that they can trust them? And are they competent? And there's a whole slew of other questions. If you want to break down trust, I'm happy to break down the science of it.
That was going to be my next question, actually. Yeah, let's talk about that. How you build trust with people. So once you've made the connection, then how you build trust, whether it's digitally with the world we've been in for the last year or in person.
So there's two things that we can look at here. One is, let's first ask the question, what is trust made out of? And some people say it's made out of four things. I think depends how you parse it. I think it's made out of three things. And those three things are competence, your ability to perform a task. So number two is honesty or integrity. And the third is benevolence, or you have my best interests at heart. Now, so let's run through a few examples. So competence, if I want to know how to do a successful podcast, I'll turn to you and I'll say, Jon, which technologies should I use? What do you think of these microphones? All this kind of stuff, right? And you've clearly have a phenomenal track record. So when it comes to competence, you're in the clear. But let's say one day I buy the mic that you suggest and it breaks. Do I go, oh, Jon's incompetent, I can't trust him? No, I assume I got a lemon in the mail and I'll just replace the mic, right? It's not like you're not untrustworthy because I got a lemon. But if we found out that one of our friends lied to us, like a big lie, would you assume that was a one-off, or would you think maybe I need to question some of the other things they've told me?
Yeah, you question everything else at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can see that a breach in honesty is a much bigger deal than a breach in competence. But there's a weird loophole, and it works like this. So the two of us are walking down the street. It's post-COVID. Everybody's safe and vaccinated. And I say, hey, I need to pick something up from a friend's house. And you're like, okay, no problem. And when we get there, 40 of your closest friends jump out and scream, surprise! Now, I want to acknowledge something. In this scenario, I've just lied to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever turn to me and go, Jon, you lied to me. We can't be friends anymore?
Depends on how much I hate surprise parties.
Surprise parties, yeah.
Right.
But it would be really weird because human beings relate to benevolence as more important than honesty, and honesty is more important than competence. And what's interesting about this is that human beings, especially those in sales and marketing, tend to lead with competence. Mm-hmm. We say, our systems function perfectly. They're 99.999% effective, or whatever it is. And that's great. But what this demonstrates is that we actually want people to lead with benevolence. I want to know that you are clear on what matters to me and that you care about me accomplishing that. And so if you lead with, hey, Jon, I know that what's really important to you is helping small businesses or growing businesses really succeed with their content. How can I help you bring that to life? That's probably going to be a lot more meaningful than me going, our servers are 99999, like whatever.
Right. Is it insecurity that leads people to focus on the competence piece first, or is it just kind of a misguided misunderstanding of the way that you build trust?
I think it's a misguided misunderstanding. It's also, I think, puts us in a more vulnerable space to talk to people about what's important to them. Right? There was some research that suggested that introverts can often be better salespeople because they ask more meaningful questions. And I think that there's something to that, which is that really, there's certain things that maybe can just be sold through Facebook ads, like a Netflix subscription, right? We're not using Netflix because we have some deep emotional connection to the people at Netflix.
Yeah.
But if you want like a $500,000 contract, people have got to trust you.
Right. Yeah. It's so important. I mean, I just wrote an article short piece about, how I feel like the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which was written in 1936, was really written about podcasting because it's about benevolence. It's about demonstrating that you have someone's best interest at heart. Talk about the third piece, which is the sense of community or belonging and how you develop that one.
Sure. So it's kind of interesting. When Google looked at what makes an incredible team, the general theories are like you take a bunch of super geniuses with massive IQs, like Google has piles of, and you throw them into a room with a problem and they'll come out with a solution. But really, the greatest predictor was actually something called psychological safety. This idea that you can express your opinion without feeling like you're going to be exiled from the group. For human beings, the greatest punishment we have in many places in the world, I'm not talking capital punishment, but is exile. It's either solitary confinement or saying you are so awful that none of us want to be around you. And, 40,000 years ago, exile probably meant you were going to die because we are just not designed to be alone. Human beings are not the fastest. We're not the strongest. What we are is better at coordinating and working together than any other species. And now we have massive buildings and, we
corporations.
have corporations and cruise ships and global warming, all because we're really good at
right.
at
working together.
Yes.
Right.
Global warming is really just a sign that we're awesome as groups. Anyway, so
well, that's I think what has made this pandemic so devastating is that we've been deprived of that sense of community, that sense of belonging. We've not been able to get together in small or big. I mean, in many ways, it's just such a brutal experience we've all been through this past year.
It's interesting. I first of all couldn't agree more with you. There's this great example that during the German Blitzkrieg, right? The attacks on Britain. People were worried that the bomb shelters would overflow and that people would fight and hurt each other or rob from each other. And to the best of my knowledge, there weren't any major incidences like that. And that's because when things get really bad, overwhelmingly, what you don't see is looting. Overwhelmingly, what you see is people saving each other and supporting each other and sharing what little they have with each other. Because when we're going through hell, what makes us feel sane is being with one another. And a pandemic is one of these, major catastrophic issues that the thing that's natural to us is the thing that's going to hurt us. Whereas in times of war, you can, group all the kids together and all their friends and let them have sleepovers together and it makes them feel better. We just didn't have that in this time around.
Yeah. It's interesting. I live in Northern California. We've had these awful wildfires in recent years, thanks to global warming. And it just seems to be getting worse and worse. But there have been a few experiences that have been just amazingly touching that have only really happened because of these wildfires. There was one time, 1.5 years ago before the pandemic, where power was out in the whole neighborhood for like 5 or 6 days. And finally, after 5 or 6 days, one of the neighbors had a crock pot that I don't even know how they powered it, but somehow they put together a big thing of soup. And they said, everyone come to our house. And the whole neighborhood, which never did this before, came together and we had soup together at this person's house. And it was such a powerful experience of belonging, of community.
Yeah.
And, in spite of this experience that we're going through with all these fires and everything. So,
I think one of the biggest opportunities for companies is that, and I think Salesforce has done a really good job of this, is that currently they keep all of their customers siloed, right? Oh my God, if they talk to each other, then they'd find out whatever, who knows what they'll find out. But if you remember, the thing that was the predictor of longevity, number 2 was social ties. Number 1 was social integration. And so if we can actually get those customers to connect with each other, or get your friends and leads to all connect with them, then it actually increases your relationship to all of them. Because, John, if you're friends with 25 of my closest friends, I'm going to be hearing a lot more about you, right? And that'll increase the probability that we'll do business together. It'll increase the probability that we'll be at celebrations together, and it'll increase just our connectedness. And that's why belonging is so critical, is that it's the fundamental structure of a society. And if you can cause connections between the people that you want to engage with, then it keeps them close to you.
I'm such a fan of that. There's a reason that conferences we've gone to, it started with small little dinners and we eventually grew to bigger and bigger, 300 person gatherings, because it's such a great way to be that connector. I want to wrap things up. That was a perfect segue into my final two questions. First, I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look around at, you just mentioned friends, or if you look at peers, other authors, perhaps others in, who you would consider to be contemporaries, who do you respect? Who do you admire? And I'm sure this could be a really long list, but
this
pick a few.
Could be a really long list. So there's an author by the name of Shane Snow who wrote two phenomenal books. One's called Smart Cuts, and the other is Dream Teams. And not only is he one of my favorite people on the entire planet, but I'm really appreciative because he also introduced me to my book agent who helped me sell this book. So I have a profound admiration for him. How many am I allowed to say?
As many as you like until the orchestra gets you.
Yeah, until the music.
Yeah.
So in my book, I tell the kind of crazy story of how a comic book fan ended up helping save Marvel Comics through the creation of the modern Comic-Con. And I grew up really, really geeky. And if it wasn't for him and his team, then there'd be no place, no home for geeks, right? I'd argue that there were three things that gave geeks a place in this society. One is the iPhone. The second is Comic-Con. And the third is .com billionaires. Because suddenly technology could make you loads of money and you could be a celebrity for it. The iPhone made programming cool because people wanted to make apps. And Comic-Con literally gave a culture and a home for these disparate groups that loved their storylines, so that people weren't just playing Dungeons and Dragons in their basement.
Again, so community and belonging right there.
Yeah. And so I think that guy's name is Gareb Shamus, and there's several other. There's a guy named Todd DeSanto who wrote and produced the X-Men movie, which saved Marvel Comics. And because of that, we have an entire modern mythology, right? More people know who Thor is than probably any other god. So,
cool.
So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of people, but there are just a few.
Great. And then last question. All right, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet like the Oscars or the Emmys. You're receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award for everything you've done up until this point. And what we all want to know is, looking even further back, maybe in your trajectory, it could be to childhood, could be high school. Who do you think? Who are the mentors? Who are the friends? Who are the peers? Who are the business partners who you would acknowledge in your remarks? So
there was, I grew up dyslexic, which at the time, and I'm still dyslexic, but at the time, when I was a child, it was kind of equated to kind of lacking intelligence. And I was put in the remedial math class, not because I was not good at math, but just because I was dyslexic. And one day, my math teacher walks up to me and says, "Hey, John, I see you're not doing the work. Why is that?" And I'm like, "Well, it's boring." And she said, "Yeah, do this." And she gave me a math problem that I shouldn't know how to do. And I solved it. And she said, "Starting Monday, you're in the main class." And then a month later, I was in the advanced class. And then a few months later, I was just studying on my own in the hallway. And it was the first time anybody really gave me a shot to consider maybe being dyslexic didn't mean that I was stupid. Maybe it just meant that I do things different. And I would think Linda Messing. So,
that's a great story. That's a great story. Thank you. Thanks, Jon, for sharing that. Jon, where can people go to learn more about the book, buy a copy of the book, and learn more about you?
Well, there's this wondrous place in the Amazon where people can buy my book. And they could get it in 2 days if they have Prime. So you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can support your local bookshop. There's a million different places you could get it. Also, if you want to find out more about the type of stuff I do, I have a website, Jon Levy TLB. That's JONLEV as in Victor, Y as in yellow, T like Thomas, L like lion, B like boy. And I'm Jon Levy TLB on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, Clubhouse, if that's still going to be a thing by the time this comes out.
Right.
So, and I love hearing from people. So please reach out.
Jon, You're invited. The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence is the name of the new book. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me on, John. This was super fun.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with Jon Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.